So, an interface is really any kind of device that we use to interact with each other or with the environment to do things for ourselves or to do things with a group. And actually, often it's with a group. Often, interfaces are our avenue into group activity. And an interface can be as simple as your sensory organs, how you see things, feel, smell things, or it can be your tools, whether you're using a stone tool back during the Neolithic, or you're using a computer to access knowledge and information. And I want to also remind people that interfaces can be things like a city. Architecture is an interface. Your clothing is an interface. The reason why people obsess over pockets is because they're a really important interface and they allow you to do things with your body and move into places because you got stuff in your pockets and you can just carry it there. So all that stuff falls under interfaces. And when we write, it's really important to be thinking about all those interfaces and how they fit together and the affordances they provide.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 167 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, the Chewie to my Han Solo, the Joker from my Commander Shepard, M.J. Kuhn. How you doing, M.J.?
Hi, I am doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. We're having lots of cats today, and I'm just a happy boy. And you can make MJ a happy lady if you go get Among Thieves. And just indulge in this wonderful heist full of hatchets and all kinds of, found family shenanigans.
Found family shenanigans. I love it. That's a great descriptor.
Yeah,
honestly.
that's a good,
right?
good scenario in general.
Yeah. Yes, I love it. And if you want to support Adrian, go check out his debut novel, Mushroom Blues, for some fungal punk noir goodness.
Fungal shenanigans.
Fungal shenanigans.
Probably not the nicest shenanigans. Less fun. And also for more fan family and fuck ups, you can go check out The Queen of Days by Greta Kelly. Also The Frozen Crown and The Seventh Queen. Go support our lovely co-host Greta. As well, a quick note for listeners, you can support SFF Addicts on Patreon for a ton of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. So check the links in the description to support what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. And subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And now joining us once again is the lovely Annalee Newitz, journalist, podcaster, extraordinaire, and author of Autonomous, The Terraformers, Four Lost Cities, and much more, including their new novella, Automatic Noodle, for all your robot foodie needs. They got you. Welcome back, Annalee. How are you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. Yeah.
An absolute pleasure. A heads up, this is part 2 of our 2-part chat with Annalee, so I recommend checking out part 1 to get to know them better. Today, though, we're making connections as we delve into a masterclass on interfaces in science fiction. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Poe Targe's job was to stand at attention and look good in a uniform, unless someone earned themselves an ass-kicking. He spent years climbing the ranks to be a master sergeant in the Sorrento Royal Senate Guard, and now he has the top-tier gig. He's guardian to High Senator Sarah Brand, one of the leaders of the planet Sorrento. Life is going pretty good for Poe, and he's looking forward to a future of settling down and retiring from service. But all that changes when High Senator Brand receives troubling news. Shattered is the story of doing the right thing and the consequences of those actions, following Poe Targe, Sarah Brand, and their friends as they struggle to keep their planet safe. Shattered, a Sanguine Stars novella, is a short, action-packed science fantasy read that features political intrigue, fun action, and a touch of humor, all while setting the stage for everything to come in this universe. Visit nicholaswfuller.com to get your digital copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. So just to kick this off, can you define interfaces for our audience?
Yeah. So an interface is really any kind of device that we use to interact with each other or with the environment to do things for ourselves or to do things with a group. And actually, often it's with a group. Often interfaces are our avenue into group activity. And an interface can be as simple as your sensory organs, how you see things, feel, smell things, or it can be your tools, whether you're using a stone tool back during the Neolithic, or you're using a computer to access knowledge and information. And I want to also remind people that interfaces can be things like a city. Architecture is an interface. Your clothing is an interface. The reason why people obsess over pockets is because they're a really important interface and they allow you to do things with your body and move into places because you got stuff in your pockets and you can just carry it there. So, all that stuff falls under interfaces. And when we write, it's really important to be thinking about all those interfaces and how they fit together and the affordances they provide.
Yeah. Now I feel bad for convincing Nicholas Eames not to wear cargo shorts anymore. I'm a bad friend.
Oh my God, I love cargo shorts. Do not
Right?
ever discourage cargo
Hey,
pants
many
or
I-
cargo
pockets.
shorts.
I was 18. I
Okay.
was,
You're forgiven.
I had that cocksure fucking attitude of an 18-year-old who just started university. And,
Mhm.
then I meet Nick, who's 10 years older than me. I'm like, why are you wearing cargo shorts? Super judgmental. So I'm
Backstory
sorry,
of
Nick.
Adrian bullying
If
I
you
you.
do
are
feel
listening,
like-
Nicholas, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I also feel like there was this like moment in the aughts that was like a very anti-cargo
Anti-cargo.
short.
But they're
Just like
super
anti-cargo
functional.
pants in general.
But they're super functional. Think of
Yeah.
all the pocket space, all the
Mhm.
shit you can carry. Look at those interfaces.
I love cargo pants. I'm wearing a pair of pants that are called work pants, and that is because they have really big pockets.
Yeah, I love it. Annalee's at work.
Exactly.
Now,
I've
why do
got,
interfaces?
a pencil in my pocket.
Just a pencil, nothing else, and a coffee, whatever else. Maybe some catnip. I don't know.
Yeah.
Why do interfaces personally fascinate you so much, though?
I think it's because they are so ubiquitous and we rarely see them or think about them. And yet they shape everything that we do. I was saying earlier, a city design can be an interface. And if you're in a city that has really good public transit, that completely changes your relationship to what you can do in that city. And vice versa. I grew up in a place that was a transit desert, and it meant that kids were kind of stuck. You couldn't really, until you could drive, and if you had a family that could afford to let you use the car, you really just didn't have a lot of options. And we would, like, buses became legendary to us. We would like be like, wow, there's this one bus you can take to get all the way to Balboa Beach. And so we took that bus occasionally. So I got interested in thinking about interfaces in science fiction because there's actually a whole unsung art to creating them in TV shows and movies, especially. There were interfaces created especially for Star Trek, for example, that have all this lore behind them, like all of the different interfaces you see where people are punching the buttons or touching the touch screens. That was somebody's job. It was a couple actually, and they came up with all those ideas. And interfaces can be part of like setting a mood. Like if you're thinking about the scene in another movie with great interfaces, 2001 has Hal spying on people using different interfaces. Hal, the disembodied robot that also has a very scary interface, the kind of glowing red light.
Yeah, super ominous.
Yeah, and Hal is able to figure out that the astronauts are scheming against it because it reads their lips. And it's just this really important part of the narrative, but it kind of opens up a way of thinking about humans' relationship with their technology and these machines and the ways in which interfaces make us vulnerable to spying, for example, but also, allow us to do all kinds of things that we couldn't before. So I'm really interested in both that built environment design, but also how, of course, in science fiction, an interface can allow you to go to a new world. Basically, you could enter a virtual space or fly or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I love those two examples. I want to know though, what are some of the coolest interfaces that you've encountered in science fiction, and what made them cool? Like, was it what they looked like if it was a visual medium, or how they functioned? Like, let's dig in.
Okay, so I'll start with some visual stuff to kind of give you a sense of what I like. I love interfaces that are very biological. So, of course, I'm a huge fan of David Cronenberg and his work because he loves coming up with creepy biological interfaces. And in his movie Existenz, which people love it, they hate it, but it's about a video game that is played using a console that's basically biological, and it looks squishy, and it has this long kind of umbilical cord looking wire that you plug into a port like right above your butt. So there's definitely, it's Cronenberg being Cronenberg. He's just like, any kind of butt penetration is going to be happening in a Cronenberg movie. But it's also, of course, playing with the idea that first was popularized in the novel Neuromancer by our pal William Gibson, who imagined people having a port in their head where there'd be a brain-computer interface. And brain-computer interfaces now, of course, are real. We have people who have them, who use them to communicate and move cursors around, and they're getting better and better as we learn more about it. So I love that. I love an interface that allows our bodies to connect with technology, but also that themselves feel organic. And in Star Trek Discovery, which is set in the future of the future in that series, they also have a kind of organic interface that they use in their ships, where people just kind of plunge their hands inside this goop and like move their hands around in the goop, and that controls the spaceship. And I just love that because I felt like it really reflected imagining technologies that are radically different from what we have now. So anything like that, any kind of interface where you see this in fantasy a lot, where people can kind of interface with trees. I know that was in the movie Avatar, which, again, one of those things where you love it or you don't love it. But
I mean, speaking of plugging things in as well. Yeah.
Right.
yeah. And I think, again, James Cameron, who directed that film, he's famous for being very detail oriented about those exact kinds of things, about interfaces and about world building in a visual way. He apparently was obsessed with the Alien movies in making sure every rivet in the spaceship looked real. And it shows, he's got these really lived in looking environments. And so, yeah, like stuff like Avatar, where again, you've got a kind of a biological interface. So I love that kind of stuff. And I think that those are some of the coolest interfaces I've seen. But I also like interfaces like what we see in the Murderbot series, which I think in the Murderbot TV show was very well realized visually, which is that Murderbot is a character who is your classic cyborg and can interface with all kinds of surveillance devices wirelessly. And so because Murderbot is extremely neurospicy, one of its big fears is meeting people's eyes. It really doesn't like eye contact, which fully relatable. And so what it likes to do is look at people through surveillance cameras. So it'll sort of look at its feet and then be actually looking at you through some camera, somewhere. But the other thing in Murderbot, in the TV show that they show, is that some of the humans who are augmented are also using like gesture interfaces, which I think are really interesting, and also very obviously where we're going, that you'd kind of be seeing people on the street just sort of gesturing in the air. And of course, they're going through menus and punching buttons.
Looking goofy as hell.
Just as goofy as we look when we're walking around with like earbuds in and gesturing as we make phone calls, which happens all the time. So I really like that kind of way of imagining interfaces, but I also love images of urban spaces that have interesting interfaces or that have interesting designs. The design for Wakanda in the Black Panther films, I thought was really terrific, which did in fact include a lot of public transit. In my novel, The Terraformers, I thought a lot about cities as interfaces and how you design a city to be welcoming to people versus hostile. There's a lot of hostile urban environments in our world, and I've seen them in person. And there's all kinds of ways to make people feel like when they're in a city, they're really not allowed to go anywhere except their own little tiny neighborhood. And so, yeah, I love to see all that kind of stuff treated with mindfulness in a story, to be aware of how people interact with the world and how that shapes their perceptions. And one more thing I was going to name, almost forgot. I really love stories about spaceships that are sentient, that have to develop ways to interface with their crew. And the Red Scholar's Wake by Aliette de Bodard does just such an incredible job of this. I mean, also Anne Leckie's ancillary series also, but the reason why I love the Red Scholar's Wake so much is that we really kind of get into, like, what does it mean to be having sex with a holographic representation of the ship, and the ship is also kind of eating at the same time. Like, we see there's scenes where the ship and the human are having tea together and having these incredible dumplings that sound super delicious. And so there's all these questions about, like, how does that interface work, and where sensuality comes into the interface. And so it's a super complicated, also great novel. I wish that would be a TV series. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I think about with interfaces.
So cool. When you mentioned sentient spaceships, that's exactly the book that I thought of. Is just Aliette's like whole universe is so fantastic and so
incredible.
interesting. Gareth L. Powell also has an interesting sentient spaceships in Embers of War in that whole series.
And so does Becky Chambers.
Becky Chambers
has done that too.
That
and
was
I think
the first one I thought of.
I have to say, like, it's such a pleasure being alive at a time when people are telling so many stories about sentient spaceships, because it's just like one of my, we all have our beloved tropes, and that is one of mine.
Fantastic. And you're mentioning the jesters and looking silly. So I think it's kind of, it'll be interesting just as a contrast to look at, what are some of the more egregious or like ridiculous tropes and misrepresentations about interfaces, in films or in books or what have you. And even for modern audiences, like interfaces that we look back on, if we're watching like a really old episode of Star Trek or Doctor Who or something like that, and be like, wow, that looks so fucking old, like that, just wildly outdated.
Yeah. So I think, Doctor Who and old Star Trek are great examples, because there was this moment in the 1950s where, maybe like late 50s, early 60s, where buttons became just this huge obsession, especially light up buttons. And so you see a lot of spaceship interiors where the ultimate high tech is that there's just a bunch of these square buttons that are that you can press, actually physically press with your hand, that light up. And that's like the height of the future. And you see that everywhere. When you go back even further, it's funny because science fiction of, say, the 30s has a lot of spaceships that now kind of might look more realistic or modern to us, partly because they just couldn't even imagine. And so they have a lot of smooth surfaces, a lot of kind of Art Nouveau and Art Deco looking kinds of ships that are very sleek and sexy looking, but also a lot of electrical rays. That was very popular in the 30s, like this idea that you'd be communicating like with a bolt of lightning traveling between two orbs. And now that's, of course, become this huge science fiction cliche that like you'd have like a bolt of lightning coming out of something, and obviously strikes us now as very silly because we do everything wirelessly or within a wire, so you don't see those bolts of lightning. I will say that, and I think this is true for a lot of people, my biggest peeve with interfaces is in movies where we're seeing somebody doing hacking on a computer and they're trying to make it exciting somehow. How do you make hacking exciting? It's literally people in a command line typing words, usually Unix commands. So it isn't even English. And there's always some scene where I feel like this happened in a lot of James Bond movies where
Mission Impossible, I feel like kind of went into that
somebody's
territory as well.
typing and then you see the meme of like, letters and numbers swirling through the air, or like there's a giant globe and you're like penetrating the globe with your code, or like some kind of way to make
the
it
system, and then
we're
like,
breaching,
there's a hacker on there, like they have like a counter hacker or some shit
right,
like that.
like the alarms are going, there's the big triangle with the exclamation point on the screen.
or it literally will say something like downloading sensitive data. So and you'll get the like little bar.
Like a progress bar.
The progress bar, exactly. So I mean, not unrealistic. We do have progress bars in real life, but I think a lot of that stuff is, just because it is really hard to represent, typing into a computer in a way that feels exciting, but it also creates really it creates a lot of misinterpretations about how hacking works. And that actually does end up feeding into our politics because people are so scared now of what the military calls cyber or cyber warfare, and which actual computer security experts do not call cyber. They call it computer security. People just have this idea that you literally can just hop inside a system and in 2 seconds you're in, and that's not how it works. And so it is always, especially when I was covering tech as a journalist, I feel like almost every time I would talk to hackers, they would be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sick of that fucking trope."
I feel like at some point IO9 must have done like a hacker list.
I actually did several
hackers.
articles about like bad representations of hacking. So we're gonna hack the Wi-Fi, that kind of thing. And I think like, kind of connected to that, we do see a lot of stories where just a little bit of homework or maybe talking to an expert could have made the interfaces much more realistic. And instead we get people imagining all kinds of stuff that's just, silly, like how we would, use a machine to change our genetic material or something like that. And it's, we actually do have ways of changing our genetic material. We do have interfaces that handle that stuff. It's not, simple. So, but I'm a writer who likes the limitations of reality. And so to me, that's what's most fun, is knowing how it would actually work.
Agreed.
Right. Well, we don't want to do those bad tropes. Let's talk about how we can do the good stuff. You've mentioned a little bit there about, talking with somebody that knows what they're talking about there, or even using a beta reader that does, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into the storytelling process a little bit more. So, like, how can authors make their interfaces functional and believable while still serving the plot purpose that they're using it for?
Yeah, so I actually have a little rubric for thinking about this. The first thing is to remember that every interface actually is a form of agency. It's either enabling agency or preventing agency. And so it's important, as you're building your story, if your interface is going to be an important part of it, what is it? What are the affordances, but also how does it prevent your characters from doing things? So, for example, we think of classically going onto the internet, for lack of a better term, as a place where you can gain knowledge. It's an interface into encyclopedias and databases full of scientific papers. It's also a place which is increasingly shaped by algorithms. And those algorithms actually are part of the interface. And if you search for something, they are changing the results. And so that's something to be aware of as a writer is, okay, if somebody were trying to go and find a piece of data, it might not be as easy as you think. They might have to struggle a little bit. They might have to go to a different interface, or they might have to go on the street and talk to somebody because the algorithms keep leading them away from what they really want to find. And so built into that idea of agency is to think about three things about each interface: who owns it, who controls it, the design of the interface. Can everyone use the interface, or do you have to be an able-bodied person to use the interface? Is your street so screwed up that people who are in wheelchairs can't go down it? So that's an interface that only people with legs can use, right? And then there's the downstream effects of that interface. So how does using the interface shape your experience of reality? So I already mentioned algorithms, which obviously that's a downstream effect of, say, getting your news online. But also things like a digital map. Having a mapping application can help you navigate cities in different ways. And how does an interface get hacked or transformed over time? So those are all, so that the three things are ownership, design, and downstream effects. And I think starting out by wondering about those things is the first step toward writing them realistically, and also having them having your characters using them in a way that emphasizes agency over them, or agency that's being thwarted by them. Because again, I think a good story reminds us that our characters aren't just inside of the holodeck, unless they are inside the holodeck, in which case I'm not watching that episode because I hate holodeck episodes, probably because of this. They are inside a built environment that has been given to them, that they've inherited, that is beyond their control. And so they're always going to be kind of bumping up against that and using it, but also having to work around it.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as in terms of like a player character in a video game who is constantly bumping up against the limitations of the environment.
Yeah.
So it's like there are invisible barriers that the game designer, and this was more and more the case in old video games where computer processing was much slower and much less. In which case they'd have to be like,
there, but my Pokemon doesn't have cut.
Exactly.
Or it's like an area that looks like you should be able to walk into it, and you get there and your legs are just kind of moving, and you're like just pushing up
in like invisible geometry. It's exactly like that. And it's kind of like giving your characters a world that feels genuine for them, but also, in turn genuine for the reader. It's because like if it feels too fabricated, then the whole story feels less immersive, right?
Yeah.
And I like what you're talking about with like with the three sort of things to think about in terms of ownership, design, and downstream
effects. Yeah.
That's a really good point to also start thinking about, like, okay, the agency factor in how it plays into the narrative tension of the story, the things that the character is unable to do or struggles to do, but also problem solving. So how do you kind of utilize interfaces in the context of agency to help your characters overcome things or to prevent them from doing things?
Yeah. So I'm going to give kind of a weird answer to this question, because I want to emphasize how much interfaces are often invisible, but how focusing on them in a very weird and specific way can add to the realism of an even very weird story. So I am obsessed with an anime called Ramen Akaneko, which is about a group of cats who open a noodle shop. Actually, they don't just serve noodles, but they're in Japan, and they have this store that is quite popular. I mean, it's kind of like, imagine, a cat cafe crossed with a ramen place.
Imagine automatic noodle in Japan with cats.
I know. Well, you can tell that there's a little bit of, overlap there. And one of the things that comes up in the show is that customers are concerned about cat hair getting into their ramen. And there's a sign on the wall in the ramen place about how the cats have professional brushing all the time to keep their hair out of the noodles as they're cooking and as they're serving, because this is like part of the interface, right? The cat itself, herself, himself, is part of what you're paying for to get your noodles. But it also becomes a superpower because some of the cats learn a special form of meditation that allows them to hold their fur into their skin when they focus on it. So it becomes almost like a ninja power, holding your fur in.
That's such an anime thing. I love it.
It is so, and
Oh my God.
it's such a great show because it's such a silly premise. And yet, because they pay attention to this one thing that actually is kind of realistic, that people would be like, wait, I don't want cat fur in my ramen. And that you would have all these signs in the restaurant. You know, these are like little interfaces that you're looking at as you go in. And so I think that's part of what you have to think about when you're designing an interface or designing a very strange world is, what are some very specific, weirdly realistic questions that you could answer for the reader? And then you don't have to answer all the other questions about, like, how did they get to be talking cats that make noodles? Because no, you've already answered this other really important question, which is, how do the cats deal with these constant concerns about sanitation in their space? So I think that that's part of the answer, is that you focus on the specific. But also, of course, you do. In my case, I like to do research. So right now I'm writing a story about a character who's a single-celled organism. And so they have to communicate with other single-celled organisms, and that involves exchanging, sorry. And that involves exchanging chemical signals. And so I have to talk to cellular biologists about cellular signaling to figure out what kinds of chemicals they'd be exchanging. How would they be exchanging electrical signals too? Like, for a while I was writing it and I just kept saying they exchanged molecules. And I was like, that is not an interface. Like, it has to be more specific than like molecules being exchanged. And so, part of developing characters can actually be developing an interface. If you have an alien character or a robot character, for example, part of their identity is, how do they interact with the world? How do they smell things? How do they talk?
That's exactly something that I went through when I was creating Mushroom Blues and the world that it's set in. There's a whole race of fungal people, and it got me thinking about, like, how do mushrooms communicate with each other? And a lot of it does come down to chemical signals through mycelium and the ways in which the fungal people are able to communicate with each other, both through vocalizations, because they're part human, part mushroom, but they are able to basically send out chemical signals through the mycelium in their body and in their environment. And it kind of creates this, like, almost cyberpunky sort of like local
yes,
net
I
type
love
thing.
that.
Yeah. And so it's like they're able to
so
emote to
cool.
each other. So imagine like fungal people like sending chemical signals of like emojis to each other to like convey their desires and their emotions and everything like that. And so it's like
so cool.
those things can trickle into everything. It's like a lot of tension can come up with, like, how do these people communicate, right? And I think it'll be useful for us to explore interfaces in relation to characters and world. And in the case of communication, like how can they serve as a form of communication between characters, whether they are human or non-human? And that's what I love about your books, is there's so often non-human characters.
Yeah. No, and it's something that I think about a lot because I'm a nerd and I grew up around people who were very neurospicy. Anytime you're in a community of nerds or academics, there's going to be people who have ways of communicating that don't match like what you see on television, right? There's going to be people who can't really talk in a big group. They can only talk one-on-one, or people who have physical disabilities. And you have to think about, like, oh, we can't have our meeting in a place with a bunch of stairs and no elevator. And we need to think about how those interfaces are going to allow us to bring people together. And so I think that, by paying attention to the fact that actual regular humans have all of these barriers that we need to overcome to communicate with each other, it becomes easier to translate that into scenarios where you do have robots who are talking to each other in ways that don't fit our social norms. So I love to have robots having a back channel. They're talking wirelessly while they're also vocalizing to the people around them that have to use their mouths, those flappy meat mouths. And but you can also think about, if you had the ability to communicate what humans would think of as psychically, right? You're basically having mind-to-mind connections with another creature. Then you could be sending a video file or sending encrypted information. You could have communication that is hardened against ever being snooped on. At the same time, of course, if you're thinking about robots who are often created by corporations, this is going back to that ownership question. Who owns their memories? Who owns their communications? Is somebody always snooping on them? And I feel like this is something that you're starting to see in television and movies, but not as much. There was a great series. It was just a 2-season series called Made for Love that came out a few years ago about a woman whose husband is a techno oligarch, basically. And he invents a device, which is a brain implant that allows a couple. The idea is that it's being marketed to couples who want to be closer to each other. And when it's implanted in both of them, they can see through each other's eyes. And her husband implants this in her non-consensually. And so she runs away. But she's got this thing in her head, right? So everything she sees, he sees. So she deliberately does things like get jobs where she looks at things that upset him because he's a germaphobe. And so she goes to work cleaning toilets and she'll choose the most disgusting, dirty toilets to clean. And she'll look in them and she'll be like, I hope you're enjoying this,
I love that.
And, but also, of course, then that means that she has to be subjected to that as well. And so that is a show that is 100% about interfaces and the dangers of interfaces. But I think those are all fun ways that we can think about this stuff, because on one hand, there's something glorious and utopian about me being able to just share with you spontaneously a thought that I had and no one else can hear it. But also Google might be listening and might be training their AI on my secret thought that I sent to you, right? So it's double-sided. And I think the same thing goes for thinking about other kinds of non-human animal communication, right? It's always going to be thinking about how does the communication actually happen? What are the motivations behind communicating? I really am interested in the idea of humans expecting a certain kind of communication from another non-human creature, and that creature is just completely like confused by what the humans want. I think the movie Arrival does a really good job of thinking about that, where it's just like, your human concerns just seem really weird to us. Like we've got a whole other thing going on. And I think I always strive to achieve that in my fiction, to have characters who encounter humans and are just puzzled by all of the emphasis we place on politeness or on talking at all. Like, why do you talk all the time? Always blah, blah, blah. Why don't you just sit? It's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, it gets me thinking about, there are 2 novels that I thought about. There's one, which is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and the ways in which the spiders are uplifted and communicate. And basically, like those scenes in the book where they first encounter humans, and both sides are kind of like, "What the fuck?"
Yeah,
like there's just like so much misunderstanding there. And then there's another one. What was it? I can't remember. It's by David Brin, but it's about like uplifted dolphins.
Yeah, he has a whole uplift series where it's like
Yeah.
dolphins and 2 other animals. Yeah. I think the thing when people write uplifted animals, which is a trope I love, I'm always concerned about the fact that there's this tendency to assume that because, say you have an uplifted dog, dogs are violent. And so the idea that if you had an uplifted dog, they would be like a really aggressive, like angry person. But of course, all dogs are different. all spiders are different. Like I've totally met spiders that had different personalities because my study is right next to my backyard, so a lot of spiders hang out. And so I always want to make sure that those characters feel like individuals too. So they all have like a common interface, but they might use their interfaces really differently, the same way humans do, you know?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, the first thing I thought of with that was Fractal Noise that we read, Christopher
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Paolini,
yeah.
where it's kind of like a attempting to interface, and you can't even because you don't share any common, any common
Exactly.
ground with this completely alien species.
And my wife
Um,
started reading Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir yesterday
Mhm.
because she saw, I was like, oh, there's a movie with Ryan Gosling. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of
he's in for
it.
such a treat with that book. Another great one.
It
But
is really, I loved Project Hail Mary for how
Oh,
that's a
so
great
good.
example of
Of
highly
interfaces. Yeah.
specific. Yeah,
yeah.
thinking about the interfaces, but just being so specific about it that it just
Mhm.
feels realistic, even if it's really not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That he could crack the code
Mhm.
immediately. But we
Another
love it.
person who, just to bring up our favorite interface books, obviously Octavia Butler is just a master of this, and in her series Lilith's Brood, which is hugely influential on me and lots of other people, it's the same thing where it's aliens who are basically uplifting people and uplifting humans. I mean, they're all people, and how that changes humans to be able to interface with these aliens. And the aliens do have a way of having tentacle sex, and they kind of plug their tentacles into human brains and create this whole new experience, which involves biology as well as other kinds of stuff. And yeah, it's such a great, weird way of reimagining how human bodies work.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, speaking of tentacle sex, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, but not really.
No, I
Like,
am all about it.
Nice
because
segue, MJ.
I'm
Where are we
curious
going?
about like we talked a lot about interfaces and communication, and this is like very related to communication, but like I want to explore how interfaces allow characters to build relationships
Yeah.
with other characters, but also relationships with their environments. Like,
Hmm.
is there, can we dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's just super fascinating about science fiction is that you can have, and fantasy, that you can have characters who are not strictly people, right? You can have characters who are pieces of furniture. One of the things that I think all of us loved as kids about Disney movies is the kind of animism of it all, where you could have a teacup that was a person and a horse that's a person. So I think um, you know, gosh, one of the things I really love about the movie Wicked is that it's dealing specifically with that, how the environment is and the animals in the environment are being forcefully transformed and made to not be able to communicate with humans. And so I think we can see in stories like that the ways that communication does afford all kinds of intimacies, like communication across species lines or across, human to smart home or human to smart ship. It can be kind of a little microcosm of thinking about democracy, or thinking about community. Democracy just being a really big type of community, and it allows you to see how community can make our characters stronger, because as soon as they are able to make those kinds of connections, they're better equipped to deal with the world. I mean, one of the most um, I guess literal examples of that is something like your classic like Morphin Power Rangers scenario, or something like the Max in oh shit, I'm forgetting the name of the stupid movie. Um
Like Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim. Thank you. I'm like, wow, only one of my favorite movies. Anyway,
Sorry,
so
Guillermo.
yeah, sorry, Guillermo. But I mean, of course, first of all, like the giant robots in those movies, like they have this incredible interface with the psychic interface where two people are psychically connected to each other and they're controlling the robot. But we see in a literal sense that bridging multiple people, connecting them with technology makes them into a super person. That's why I mentioned Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, because they form one giant ranger. And again, something I grew up with, and it was always, kind of a dream of mine. Like, how do you create like a hive mind where everybody is connected, and it's not horrible? It's like a happy thing. And I think also, of course, this is an element of romance too. And I think we see a lot of stories that use um, interfaces as a way of thinking about romance, and a way of having a slow burn romance where you're slowly figuring out how to connect to another kind of creature. Or you can have it be an enemies to lovers type thing where, I hate computers. And it's like, no, I've actually fallen in love with my computer. Over time, it's become this beautiful relationship. And so I think that's, in many ways, that is the drama of the interface, is how do you use it to connect with each other. I always think about this erotic novel that I wish more people would read by Cecilia Tan called The Velderet, which is now still relevant, even though it was written like in the late 90s when virtual reality was first a thing that people actually thought would possibly be real one day. And because it never came true, the novel still feels very like contemporary, because we still don't have VR in the way that it's described, but it's two characters who live in a civilization that discourages sexual connection, but it does encourage VR stuff. And so they meet in VR to have like super hot BDSM. And then there's all this other stuff going on. Cecilia is such an amazing writer, but like there's also like there's a monarchy, and there's like a king and a prince, and like all kinds of amazing stuff, and world building that's happening. But it really is just about how these two characters find each other and are able to just be who they want to be and experience their bodies the way they want to experience them, because they have this interface. So yeah, check out The Velderet by Cecilia Tan. You can still order it.
And it's so beautiful that like interfaces are these monumental, they have monumental influences and monumental impacts, but it can also be a super intimate thing between two people. And it's kind of cool to like see how interfaces have progressed through science fiction, but also through science. And you've got this unique lens where you have, just through your work, the intersection of journalism and fiction writing, being able to see this intersection of real science and technological interfaces in comparison with sci-fi. So what are some sort of sci-fi interfaces that you've seen that you think are interesting, that have inspired real world interfaces and vice versa?
Oh, wow, that have inspired real world interfaces. I mean, I think that science fiction in the 50s and 60s really emphasized the idea that communications technology would be a revolutionary force, which seems really obvious now because we live in the world that sci-fi created. But basically before World War II, mostly what you saw science fiction obsessing about was things like space travel, meeting aliens, but also, kinds of future Earth, time travel things. You didn't have a lot of stuff where it was really focused on a communications device. And, Ursula Le Guin's interlinked known worlds novels kind of depend on the invention of the Ansible, which is very much a kind of proto-internet metaphor. The Ansible allows instantaneous communication all across the galaxy, which is great for characters who are dealing with the problems of time dilation and space travel, traveling faster than light, but also is a way of thinking about what happens when really distant civilizations are in instantaneous contact all the time, and how does that change them? And so I think that interface, that idea of a piece of technology that lets us have that immediate connection, is really powerful. And she's not the only author who was thinking about that kind of thing. I also think that during that same time, James Tiptree had a story that I think about all the time called The Girl Who Was Plugged In. It was an immensely well-regarded story at the time. A lot of people read it. And it's in the 60s, and it's about influencers on the internet. And it's this young woman who doesn't have much of a life. And so she decides to allow herself to be used by a corporation to control an avatar who's basically a meat puppet. They're a kind of cyborg. And so she lives inside this kind of electrical coffin and controls this um, pop star who goes around getting sponsorships from companies and like performing with bands and making money through being cute. And the way that the body is designed, this body that she's inhabiting, is that it's cheaply made. So it looks cute, but she can't feel things very well. And she can't have like sexual pleasure. And so she's doing all this stuff that people are imagining is really pleasurable, but she can't get pleasure out of it. And I just think that that is so close to what it's really like to be an influencer now, where you're kind of an avatar of yourself. And when you read stories about K-pop stars who are these avatars, and they say once they've gotten out of the business, yeah, we basically were in prison. We lived in hotels and we couldn't eat without being
Your
allowed
entire
to.
life is manufactured.
Yeah, your whole life.
Are the brand.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that there's a direct line that K-pop managers were reading that story, but it was it was a prescient idea, and I think
Right.
it has become something that all of us understand. When you explain that story, like say if I talk to my students about it, like they'd all be like, "Oh yeah, we know what that is." But in the 60s, it was a really, really frickin' weird notion. So I think that that's the kind of stuff that I see as being really influential. And again, of course, the brain computer interface, which has appeared all over the place in science fiction for a very, very long time, and now absolutely is appearing in real life. So I think, again, all of these things are kind of communications technologies, and they're getting us closer and closer to turning our own bodies into communication machines, into something that can not just talk using sound waves, but communicate, on the electromagnetic spectrum, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, going from
Potentially
biological.
bad, but also
Cool.
I mean,
and
for your
scary.
cats, it's pretty cool. But like it's like going from like biological interfaces to like transhuman interfaces. Maybe even one day like post-human interfaces. We have no idea where it could go essentially.
The other thing that I wanted to mention when we think about interfaces is sensor networks. This is something that sensors are just, a sensor can be anything that senses the environment. But now a lot of people who work in the environmental sciences and who look at wildlife use sensors placed in the environment to monitor everything from, how damp the soil is to how many mountain lions are passing through a particular area, to keep tabs on the health of the environment, the state of the environment, without tromping in there in boots and kind of messing things up. And so I see that as something, again, that we see all the time in science fiction. It's all over the place in Star Trek. It's all over the place in, stories even going back to the 1950s, where people were imagining little spy cameras everywhere. Except these are spy cameras for good, and they're monitoring, the environment, and they're monitoring biological systems. And I think that is something that it's unbelievably futuristic, and yet it's happening all over the place now. And in my novel, The Terraformers, that was a huge part of my influence, was environmental sensors and how those could evolve to be something that we could connect to, like our bodies could connect to an environmental sensor network and we would feel the trees. And how cool would that be?
That would be amazing.
That would be super cool. Like, I would love that. Well, and that kind of brings us to our kind of closing question here, which is, what is your greatest hope? Let's end on an optimistic note. Your greatest hope for modern humans and how we might start to interface with each other, the environment, moving forward. And, what role do you see yourself, authors, kind of playing in that path?
I mean, my hope is that we can start building communication networks that operate outside of corporate control and outside of government control, which is a tall order. I don't think you're ever going to get anything that's pure like that. But I do think we can think about new ways to interface with those kinds of institutions and new kinds of bargains that we can strike over how our technology is used, and to start thinking about communications technology less like something that we only rent from a company, or that we own part of, but the company owns part of it. Like when you get a Gmail account, Google has all your email in the cloud. It's different from, say, buying a blender, where you don't expect that everything you blend, you have to give 90% of it to, Westinghouse or whoever made your blender, or Black
let me
and
just
Decker.
send you like a bunch of like wet packages.
Send us the rest of that smoothie. So I think, the idea that when we buy a piece of communications technology and we use it, that all of that the technology is ours and everything we produce with it is ours. That to me would be a really utopian outcome. And I don't want to put companies out of business. I think that you have to have some kind of incentive to build these technologies and pay the people who build them. But I don't think that it has to be done so that you're extracting even more value from your consumers. I think respect your consumers. So that's one of my hopes. And I also hope that kind of the same thing for environmental sensor networks, and also sensor networks that we have in space as well, satellite networks that monitor our climate, but that also help us learn about our solar system, that those can be available as a public good, so that the public can get the data from them, not control them, because you don't want to just let like some 5-year-old kid start steering, the Mars orbiter or whatever. But to be able to look at what's coming from them, to incorporate it into policy papers, into scientific exploration, and just give people as much data as they want in a form that they understand about our environment. Because the thing that's going to be most important for us globally going forward over the next 1,000 years is going to be, how do we manage our environment now that it is changing really fast and changing because of our behavior? We need to have a feedback network that tells us when we're changing the environment again, or when the environment might be producing a superstorm of some kind, a atmospheric river, which is what we get here in California. So those are my hopes. All of it revolves around the public having interfaces to this kind of information so that we can make better decisions as a group.
Yeah. And on top of that, like having that open source information, inspiring the next generation to, pick up the baton and figure out new solutions and new creative ways to navigate these kinds of interfaces is
build
definitely
new
going to be-
interfaces, right?
Exactly.
Like I can't
Yeah.
wait for someone to build an interface that would allow me to say, like, feel prickles on my skin when a
Mhm.
rainstorm is coming, or just like my character in the terraformers, like reach down and touch the soil and be able to know whether the microbes in the soil are healthy or not.
Yeah.
I really want to hear what the microbes have to say.
I want to see like biotech tattoos. Come on, people. Let's
Oh, there you go.
Of
something
course. Come on. That's just basic. All right. We're going to have that. And then we're going to move on.
And then we're going to move on. Yeah. But Annalee, this has been absolutely fantastic. And honestly, I'm just so grateful that we have the ability to do this through the interface of the internet and through video calls and things like that, and being able to record this together. And I'm so glad that you suggested this topic, and so grateful for all the information that you've imparted upon us and our listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure. Thanks for all those good questions. And, I think some of your data right now is being owned by Zencastr, but in the future, you would have more control over that.
We're not fully indie, MJ. We're not there yet.
You're not
We'll get there.
uploading this to your own personal server
Right?
that
no.
lives under your desk.
We're working on it.
Yeah, next stage.
Yeah,
What you want to do is you want to download it into your tattoos, and so
There
you're
we go.
carrying it
Yeah.
in your
I am
data
my
tattoos.
own personal cloud.
There we go.
That feels so optimistic and happy. Annalee, thank you again for doing this. And if anyone wants to support us on Patreon, you can check out a reading from Annalee's Automatic Noodle if you contribute $5 more over there. So go check that out. And if you can let us know, Annalee, where folks can find you online.
You can find my books wherever fine books are sold. Always check out bookshop.org. You can find me on Blue Sky and Mastodon and Instagram. I'm usually Annalee N, although on Instagram I am Gitara, not weak, but you can find me by my name too. And I have a website at AnnaleeNewitz.com.
Awesome. And go support Annalee's books. You got tons to choose from, nonfiction and fiction, different lengths. Short stories, all kinds of cool stuff. Go check out Our Opinions Are Correct, because apparently MJ's and mine are not. So enjoy that as well over with Charlie Jane. You can also follow SFF Addicts across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can go check out my novel Mushroom Blues wherever fine books are sold. MJ, what about you?
Yeah, you can follow me across all the main socials at MJ Kuhn Books. Or go to my website, mjkuhn.com, and there you can find all my links to everything, including my books, my newsletter, all that jazz.
Buy her books and feed her cats.
Yes.
Yeah. Thorn and Evie are just like too much.
Thorn and Evie are hungry babies.
Yeah, the hungry babies. Go feed Annalee's cats too while we're at it.
Yeah. Feed all the cats.
Go buy The Queen of Days by Greta Kelly to support her kids and her cats.
And her cats.
So,
yeah.
If you like cats,
you need to get some cats, Adrian, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, my wife doesn't want cats. So,
Dang.
When the kids are older and they're less chaotic,
then they can have cats.
We'll consider it. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We appreciate it. For now, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.